There's something quietly unsettling about realizing you didn't just grow up in a different decade. You grew up in a different psychological environment. Not better, not worse, just one that no longer exists. If you were a child in the 1970s, your brain developed during a rare window in modern history, a time when freedom wasn't symbolic, it was physical. You left the house without a phone, without tracking, without a constant stream of adult supervision. And yet that freedom came with real responsibility. You were expected to figure things out, to come home on time, to handle yourself. What makes this era so unique isn't nostalgia, it's context. Society trusted children in a way that would feel unthinkable today. Risk wasn't eliminated, boredom wasn't managed, discomfort wasn't immediately solved, and your nervous system adapted to that reality. This isn't about romanticizing the past or criticizing the present. It's about recognizing that development is shaped by environment, and the environment you grew up in trained your brain for autonomy, tolerance, and self-reliance in ways that modern childhood simply cannot replicate. That's why, when you look at today's world and feel slightly out of place, it doesn't mean you're outdated. It means you are calibrated for a world that no longer exists, and you're still carrying its wiring forward. There was a sentence every child of the 1970s learned to respect very quickly. I'm bored. Not because it was met with sympathy, Teddy, but because it wasn't. If you said it out loud, you already knew what was coming next. Then go find something to do, or I'll find something for you. And whatever your parents found was never as appealing as figuring it out yourself. So you learned to solve boredom before it solved you. You weren't handed activities. There were no scheduled enrichment programs, no curated distractions, no screens waiting to rescue your attention. Empty time wasn't treated as a problem to fix. It was simply part of the day, and your brain had to respond. Psychologically, this mattered far more than most people realize. Research on unstructured childhood shows that when children are left to organize their own time, they develop stronger executive function, the mental skills responsible for planning, focus, and self-regulation. But more importantly, something deeper formed beneath that. You learned competence. You discovered that when nothing was happening, you could make something happen. You devoured books, built forts, rode your bike until the day disappeared, or sat on the floor taking things apart just to see how they worked. Purpose didn't arrive from the outside. It emerged from your own initiative. Modern childhood often treats boredom like a threat, something dangerous that must be immediately neutralized. But your nervous system learned the opposite lesson. That boredom isn't an emergency, it's a signal, a quiet invitation to engage your own mind, and that lesson stayed with you. As an adult, this is why empty space doesn't terrify you the way it seems to unsettle others. You don't panic when there's nothing to scroll, nothing scheduled, nothing demanding your attention. Your brain remembers something modern life rarely teaches anymore. Meaning doesn't always arrive pre-packaged. Sometimes it has to be created. What boredom quietly taught you went deeper than creativity. It taught you how to generate purpose when none was given. When your day wasn't pre-filled, something subtle happened inside your mind. Without schedules, notifications, or external pressure telling you where to look next, your attention turned inward. You had to ask yourself questions most children today rarely face. What do I feel like doing? What matters to me right now? What holds my interest long enough to stay with it? This is where identity begins to form. Psychologically, unstructured time creates space for what researchers call intrinsic motivation, the drive that comes from curiosity and internal satisfaction, not reward or approval. When you chose how to spend your hours, your brain learned to associate effort with meaning, not just outcomes. You didn't need a gold star to stay engaged. The engagement itself became the reward. This ability is easy to overlook because it feels so ordinary to you. But in a world that constantly tells people What to want, where to click, and how long to stay, it's becoming increasingly rare. Many adults today feel strangely empty, not because their lives lack opportunity, but because they were never taught how to sit with open space long enough for desire to emerge. You were. That's why silence doesn't immediately unsettle you. Why you can stay with a thought without needing to escape it. Why you're often comfortable starting something without knowing exactly where it will lead. You learned early that purpose doesn't always arrive fully formed. Sometimes it appears only after you've been alone with your own attention long enough to let it surface. You didn't learn about danger from warning labels or instructional videos. You learned it by living inside your body. You climbed trees that were too high. You rode bikes without helmets. You played near creeks, construction sites, and fireworks with a confidence that would make modern parents freeze. And sometimes it went wrong. You fell. You got cut. You broke bones. You learned where your limits actually were. Not because someone explained them, but because your nervous system felt them. Psychologically, this mattered in ways that last a lifetime. Research in developmental psychology shows that children who engage in physical risk during play develop more accurate threat assessment as adults. Their brains learn to distinguish between real danger and manageable risk, not by imagining it, not by watching it happen to someone else, but through direct experience. Every scraped knee taught your amygdala something important. This hurts, but it isn't catastrophic. Every close call recalibrated your fear response. Over time, your baseline anxiety lowered, not because you were reckless, but because your nervous system became realistic. Modern childhood often reverses this process. Risk is removed, but fear is amplified through screens. Children see danger constantly, but rarely feel it in proportion. Their brains learn vigilance without calibration. Yours learned calibration without obsession. That's why chaos doesn't scramble you the way it seems to rattle others. When a situation turns tense, your body doesn't immediately jump to panic. It moves into assessment. What's actually happening? What matters right now? What can be done? Pain for you was never proof of failure. It was information, a story, a lesson carried in the body. And that's why, when things go wrong, you don't freeze. You adapt, not because you're fearless, but because your nervous system learned reality the way it's meant to be learned, through experience, not avoidance. When things fall apart, you tend to get quieter. While others panic, explain, or emotionally spiral, something in you shifts into a different mode. You start scanning, prioritizing, solving. From the outside, this calm can look like detachment, like you don't care enough. But internally, something very specific is happening. Your nervous system has been here before. Growing up, you learned that chaos didn't always come with instructions. When plans collapsed or situations turned unpredictable, no one rushed in to buffer the discomfort. You had to orient yourself, assess what mattered, and act. Over time, your body learned that urgency doesn't require panic. Psychologically, this is the result of accurate threat calibration. Because you experienced real consequences early, your system doesn't overreact to every disruption. It knows the difference between noise and danger, between discomfort and collapse. This is why, in moments of crisis, your first instinct isn't to dramatize the problem, it's to stabilize the situation. You don't need reassurance before you move. Movement is the regulation, and this is often misunderstood. People who didn't grow up this way may interpret your steadiness as emotional distance. But it isn't distance, it's efficiency. It's a mind trained to stay functional when things are messy. You don't deny chaos, you just don't let it take over the room. You learned how to be alone, before being alone became something to fear. Long stretches of your childhood were quiet by today's standards. No constant notifications, no algorithm pulling your attention every few seconds. You spent hours in your room listening to music from start to finish. You lay in the grass talking to friends or walked alone with your thoughts, not because you were lonely, but because there was nothing demanding you escape yourself. Psychologically, This shaped a capacity that's quietly disappearing: comfortable solitude. Solitude is not isolation. It's the ability to remain present with your own inner experience without immediately needing distraction, validation, or noise. Studies on pre-digital childhood show that people who grew up without constant connectivity experience significantly less anxiety when left alone with their thoughts. Their nervous systems don't interpret silence as a problem that needs fixing. Modern life teaches the opposite lesson. Silence now feels suspicious. Empty moments are quickly filled. Many people don't struggle with being alone because they dislike themselves. They struggle because they were never trained to tolerate unstructured inner space. You were. This is why boredom doesn't automatically push you toward escape. Why waiting rooms, long drives, or quiet evenings don't feel unbearable. You don't need to be continuously entertained to feel regulated. That doesn't mean you don't value connection. It means connection isn't used as anesthesia. There's a depth that forms when a person learns early that thoughts can be sat with, not outrun. Feelings can rise and fall without immediate commentary. Identity can develop internally, not only through reflection in others. And while this skill may look invisible, it quietly supports everything else: emotional stability, self-trust, and the ability to think clearly when the world goes quiet. You didn't learn to escape yourself. You learned how to stay. Waiting used to be built into life. If you wanted to watch your favorite show, you waited a week. If you took photos, you waited days to see if they even turned out. If you wanted to talk to someone, you memorized their phone number, called the house, and hoped they were home. Nothing arrived instantly, and that wasn't considered a flaw. It was normal. Psychologically, this shaped your relationship with reward in a powerful way. When gratification is delayed, dopamine isn't dumped all at once. It's released gradually through anticipation, effort, and follow-through. Research on delayed gratification shows that people who grow up waiting develop stronger impulse control, better emotional regulation, and more stable satisfaction over time. Their brains don't become dependent on constant stimulation to feel engaged. Modern systems do the opposite. Instant rewards flood the brain with dopamine, then drop it just as fast. Over time, this trains dissatisfaction. Nothing holds attention for long. Pleasure becomes short-lived, and boredom feels unbearable. Your nervous system was trained differently. You learned that wanting something didn't mean getting it immediately, and that this didn't diminish its value. In fact, it often made the experience richer. Anticipation became part of enjoyment, not an obstacle to it. This is why instant gratification rarely satisfies you the way it seems to satisfy others. Not because you're hard to please, but because your brain never burned out its reward system chasing constant hits. Patience for you isn't passive. It's a skill, one that allows depth, commitment, and follow-through in a world that keeps trying to rush past all three. By the time you were 8 or 9, you were already managing a level of independence that would alarm most people today. You left the house in the morning, often without a clear plan, and the only rule was simple: be back before the street lights come on. No phones, no check-ins, no location sharing. You navigated neighborhoods, creeks, woods, and unfamiliar places using judgment, intuition, and trial and error. And when something went wrong, you figured it out, or dealt with the consequences. Psychologically, this built a powerful internal wiring. Research on childhood autonomy shows that unsupervised freedom strengthens internal motivation and decision-making. When no one is watching, choices become real. You learn to assess situations, weigh risks, and act without external approval. Over time, this creates a strong internal locus of control, the belief that your actions matter and your decisions carry weight. But this strength came with a hidden cost. When children are trusted to manage themselves early, they often learn to contain emotions as well as behavior. You didn't just solve problems, you handled them. Quietly, independently, and while that builds competence, it can also limit emotional language. Many people who grew up this way are excellent at functioning, but less practiced at asking for help. This is why you may find yourself defaulting to self-reliance even when support is available. Why vulnerability can feel unnecessary or vaguely uncomfortable. Not because you don't value connection, but because your system learned early that survival didn't depend on it. Unsupervised autonomy made you capable, resilient, self-directed, but it also taught you to carry more than you ever needed to carry alone. There's a quiet discomfort many people from your generation carry, but rarely name. It's the sense that the world is moving in a rhythm your nervous system doesn't recognize. You're not confused by technology. You're not resistant to change. But something about modern life feels louder, faster, and more performative than necessary. Constant updates, constant explanations, constant emotional broadcasting. And somewhere beneath it all, you may find yourself thinking, why does everything need so much noise? Psychologically, this isn't resistance, it's mismatch. Your nervous system was shaped in an environment where attention was stable, autonomy was expected, and competence was demonstrated quietly. Today's world rewards visibility, immediacy, and continuous self-expression. Regulation now comes from external feedback rather than internal stability. So when you hesitate to overshare or don't feel compelled to narrate every feeling in real time, it can be mistaken for distance. When you pause instead of reacting, it can be misread as disengagement. But these responses aren't deficits. They're adaptations to a different developmental environment. This is why you may feel increasingly out of place, not socially, but psychologically. Your system isn't broken. It's simply calibrated for depth over speed, substance over signal. And while the world has changed, that wiring still has value. In moments that require steadiness, discernment, and quiet competence, it becomes an anchor, even if it doesn't always fit the tempo of the room. This isn't about going back. That world is gone, and it isn't coming back in the same form. But the wiring it gave you still matters. You don't need to abandon your autonomy, your patience, or your comfort with quiet to belong in the modern world. You don't need to become louder, faster, or more visible to stay relevant. Those traits weren't limitations. They were adaptations to a different kind of environment, and they still carry value where depth, stability, and clear thinking are needed. The work now isn't to outgrow that childhood, but to integrate it, to keep the self-trust and resilience it gave you, while allowing yourself more connection, support, and emotional range than you were ever encouraged to have back then. If this video helped you understand yourself a little more, or put words to something you felt for years, you're not alone here. Share your experience in the comments, and if you appreciate research-based psychological insight like this, consider subscribing. We're just getting started.